You don't belong in that line, kid. Economy boarding is over there with the rest of your kind.
The words sliced through the morning chaos of Chicago O'Hare International Airport like a blade. They weren't whispered. They weren't muttered under someone's breath. They were delivered with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the power in the world. Brad Thompson. Gate agent for Apex Airways Flight 847 stood behind his podium at gate C-15, arms crossed, chin raised, staring down an 18-year-old black teenager in a faded University of Chicago hoodie. The kid didn't flinch. He didn't shout back. He didn't even look surprised. He just stood there calm as morning coffee, holding his phone with a boarding pass glowing on the screen. But something in his dark eyes shifted just slightly, like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. In exactly 47 minutes, that teenager would make one phone call that would bring down Brad Thompson's career, destroy an entire flight crew's livelihood, and send shockwaves through the aviation industry. None of them knew it yet. They were all too busy being confident in their prejudice. Before we dive into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been judged just by how you look? Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere because someone decided your skin color or your clothes meant you were less than? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of how they dress, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to see will restore your faith in justice. The teenager's name was Jamal Rodriguez. 18 years old, 6 feet tall, with the quiet confidence of someone who had been raised to handle adversity with grace. He wore old Jordan sneakers that had seen better days, dark jeans with a small tear at the knee, and that University of Chicago hoodie his mother had bought him when he got accepted with a full scholarship. His backpack was worn leather, the kind that told stories of countless study sessions and late nights in the library. What Brad Thompson saw was a threat. What he didn't see was the valedictorian. The kid who had graduated early from high school. The young man who spoke 3 languages fluently and had already been accepted to study civil rights law. The son of the most powerful woman in the aviation industry. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in December. The holiday rush was in full swing, turning O'Hare into a living, breathing beast of stressed travelers, crying babies, and frayed nerves. Flight 847 to Los Angeles was running on time, which in the airline world was basically a Christmas miracle. The first-class cabin was nearly full with business executives, diamond frequent flyers, and the kind of people who paid $3,000 for a 5-hour flight because they could. Brad had worked this gate for 7 years. In those 7 years, he had seen exactly 4 black passengers in first class. 2 of them were professional athletes. 1 was a celebrity. The 4th had been bumped up due to an overbooking situation and had spent the entire flight being watched by the crew like he might steal the silverware. Today, Brad thought there would not be a 5th. Zone 1 first class and diamond medallion members only. Brad's voice boomed over the PA system, though his eyes were scanning the crowd looking for people trying to cut the line. Jamal stood up. He grabbed his backpack, a battered JanSport that he'd had since high school, and walked toward the priority lane. Brad saw him coming from 30 feet away. He didn't see the polite young man who had held the door for an elderly woman 5 minutes ago. He saw a black teenager in a hoodie walking toward the red carpet of the priority lane. Brad's jaw tightened. Not on my watch, he thought. As Jamal approached the podium, Brad didn't even look up at him. He stepped to the side, physically blocking the narrow path to the jet bridge door. "Zone 4 is that way," Bud Gregg said, pointing a thick finger toward the economy lane, which was currently a mosh pit of angry travelers. "Wait for your group number." Marcus paused, pulling his headphones down around his neck. "Excuse me." "Economy," Brad said louder this time, performing for the impatient businessman behind Jamal. "This is priority first class. You need to step back. You're blocking the paying customers." A few people in line chuckled. A man in a tailored suit behind Jamal sighed loudly, checking his Rolex. I know, Jamal said, his voice calm, distinct, and lacking the aggression Brad was hoping to provoke. I'm in Zone 1, Seat 2A. Jamal held out his phone, the QR code on the screen glowing bright. Brad snatched the phone out of Jamal's hand, not scanning it, but inspecting it like it was contraband. He squinted at the screen. The name read M. Rodriguez. The status read VIP First Class. Brad muttered. He looked at the phone, then back at Jamal's bleach-stained hoodie. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. Right. Where do you get this screenshot, kid? Photoshop is getting good these days. It's not a screenshot, Jamal said, reaching for his phone. It's the app. Scan it. Don't snatch at me, Brad snapped, pulling the phone away. I can deny you boarding for aggressive behavior right now. You want that. You want to take the bus home. The line behind them was growing restless. Hey, come on. Let the kid through or kick him out. We have a flight to catch. Someone shouted. Brad felt the pressure. He wanted to humiliate this kid to prove that people like him didn't belong in seats like that, but he also had an on-time departure metric to hit. He aggressively jammed the phone under the scanner. Beep a green light. Brad stared at it. It was a valid ticket, a full fare ticket. Usually this cost around $3,000 for a coast-to-coast flight. Must be a system glitch, Brad muttered, shoving the phone back into Marcus's chest with unnecessary force. Or you stole a credit card. Don't think you're in the clear. I'm radioing the crew. One wrong move and you're off. Jamal took his phone, his expression unreadable. He didn't argue. He didn't scream. He just looked Brad in the eye for a second too long, a look that made Brad shiver slightly without knowing why, and walked onto the jet bridge. Brad grabbed his radio immediately. Flight 847, this is Gate. You've got a Zone 1 passenger seat 2A. Possible fraud. Definitely suspicious. Keep eyes on him. Name is Rodriguez. The voice that crackled back was sharp and eager. Copy that, Brad. We'll handle him. It was Maria Gonzalez. If Brad was the gatekeeper, Maria was the dragon. And Jamal had just walked into her cave. Jamal Rodriguez had learned about dignity from watching his mother build an empire. Victoria Rodriguez hadn't started life with power. She had earned it one rejection at a time, one closed door at a time, one person telling her she didn't belong at a time. 25 years ago, she had been a young Latina woman trying to become a pilot in an industry that looked at her like she was a curiosity at best, a threat at worst. Every flight school had a reason why she wasn't the right fit. Every airline had an excuse for why they couldn't hire her, so she had built her own airline. Apex Airways started in a rented hangar with 2 used aircraft and a dream that respect shouldn't depend on what you looked like. 25 years later, it was an $8.7 billion company with 47,000 employees and routes to 127 destinations worldwide. Victoria Rodriguez had become the most powerful Latina in the aviation industry, and she had done it by never forgetting what it felt like to be told she didn't belong. She had raised Jamal to understand that same lesson. Power wasn't about having the biggest voice or the most expensive clothes. Power was about knowing your worth and refusing to let other people define it for you. Jamal was 18, but he carried himself like someone much older. He had graduated from Chicago's Whitney M. Young High School as valedictorian 2 months early with a 4.0 GPA and acceptance letters from 7 universities. He spoke English, Spanish, and French fluently. He played classical piano and wrote poetry. He volunteered at homeless shelters and tutored younger kids in math. None of that mattered to the people looking at him on Flight 847. All they saw was a black teenager in a hoodie. As Jamal made his way down the aisle, he could feel the stares. First class on a Tuesday morning was filled with the usual suspects: investment bankers heading to meetings, tech executives flying between offices, wealthy retirees traveling to their second homes. They looked up from their newspapers and laptops as he passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed annoyance. In seat 1B sat William Henderson III, a 55-year-old investment banker who had been flying first class with Apex Airways for 15 years. Henderson prided himself on being a Diamond Medallion member, which meant he spent over $80,000 a year with the airline. He believed this gave him certain privileges, certain rights, certain expectations about who he should have to sit next to. Henderson watched Jamal stow his worn backpack in the overhead bin and settle into seat 1A. The banker's lip curled slightly. He had paid full price for his ticket. He deserved better than this. Maria Gonzalez had been watching too. At 38, she had been flying for Apex Airways for 15 years, working her way up from regional routes to international flights to this premium domestic service. She took pride in her first-class cabin. It was her domain, her responsibility, her standard to maintain. Maria believed in standards. First class wasn't just about the leather seats and the premium meals. It was about a certain type of passenger, a certain level of respectability, a certain aesthetic that wealthy travelers expected when they paid premium prices. In her 15 years, she had developed an eye for the kind of passengers who belonged and the kind who didn't. Jamal Rodriguez, in her professional opinion, did not belong. "Excuse me," Maria said, approaching Jamal's seat as the boarding continued around them. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Jamal looked up from his phone where he had been reading a text from his university advisor. "Of course," he said politely, pulling up the app. Maria took his phone and studied the screen like she was examining evidence in a criminal case. "This is a last-minute booking," she said. "Purchased yesterday. Very expensive. That's unusual for someone your age." "My mother bought it for me," Jamal explained, "as a graduation gift." Maria hummed a sound that somehow managed to convey disbelief, suspicion, and condescension all at once. "And what did you graduate from high school?" Jamal said. "I'm starting at the University of Chicago in January." Maria's eyebrows rose. She handed the phone back to Jamal, but her expression remained skeptical. "Well," she said, "I want you to know that first class has certain expectations. We expect our passengers to be respectful, quiet, and appropriate. Any disruption, any behavior that makes other passengers uncomfortable, and we'll have to discuss alternative seating arrangements. Do you understand?" Jamal met her gaze steadily. "I understand," he said. "I'll be reading for most of the flight." "Good," Maria said. She turned away, but not before making sure her voice carried to the passengers around them. "We'll be watching." From his seat in 1B, Henderson nodded approvingly. He caught Maria's eye and smiled the kind of smile that said, "I'm glad someone is maintaining standards around here." Behind them, in seat 3C, Jessica Miller continued recording discreetly on her phone. She was a social media manager for a nonprofit organization, and she had seen enough viral discrimination videos to recognize the setup. A young black passenger being scrutinized by crew members. Suspicious questioning disguised as policy, the involvement of other passengers in the exclusion. Jessica had 127,000 followers on her various social media platforms. She posted content about social justice, civil rights, and standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. If what she thought was happening was actually happening, the world was going to see it. Captain Robert Mitchell was in the cockpit running through his pre-flight checklist. At 52, he had been flying for Apex Airways for 25 years. He was 2 years away from retirement, close enough to taste it, close enough to not want any trouble that might jeopardize his pension. Mitchell had learned early in his career that the easiest way to handle cabin disputes was to let the flight attendants handle them. Stay in the cockpit, fly the plane, let someone else deal with the drama. He had heard Maria's radio call about the suspicious passenger in 1A, but he hadn't thought much of it. Maria had good instincts about these things. If she said someone was trouble, they probably were. Mitchell had more important things to worry about, like the weather system moving across the Midwest and the air traffic control delays stacking up at LAX. What Captain Mitchell didn't know was that his willingness to look the other way, his preference for avoiding confrontation, his choice to trust the judgment of crew members who might have questionable motivations, was about to cost him everything. Back at the gate, Brad Thompson was finishing the boarding process with a satisfaction that came from a job well done. He had identified a potential problem, flagged it for the crew, and maintained the integrity of the first-class experience. In his mind, he was a guardian of standards, a protector of paying customers, a man who understood that the airline business was about more than just moving people from point A to point B. It was about maintaining a certain level of expectation, a certain type of environment, a certain class of service that people like Henderson expected when they paid premium prices. Brad had no idea that his radio call about the suspicious passenger in seat 1A had been recorded by airport security as part of routine monitoring. He had no idea that his comments at the gate had been captured by multiple passenger phones and were already being uploaded to social media platforms. He had no idea that in less than an hour his definition of suspicious would be played for a much larger audience. As Flight 847 pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway, Jamal settled into his leather seat and opened a book, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, a legal memoir about fighting for justice in an unjust world. It seemed appropriate for the moment. Across the aisle, Henderson was reading the Wall Street Journal and making notes in the margins. Behind them, Jessica Miller was documenting everything on her phone, building what she sensed might become a very important record. In the galley, Maria Gonzalez was preparing service for the first-class cabin, planning her approach for maintaining proper order during the flight. None of them knew that Victoria Rodriguez was sitting in her corner office at Apex Airways headquarters, tracking Flight 847 in real time through the company's monitoring system. She had been receiving anonymous complaints about this route for 6 months, reports of discriminatory behavior that seemed to happen just often enough to be concerning, but never when corporate investigators were paying attention. Victoria had tried traditional investigations. She had sent undercover employees. She had reviewed security footage. She had interviewed passengers and crew members. Every time the investigation had come back clean. No evidence of bias. No proof of discrimination. No reason to take action. Finally, Victoria had decided to try a different approach. She had sent her son. Jamal didn't know he was part of an investigation. As far as he knew, this was just a graduation gift from his mother, a comfortable flight to Los Angeles for college orientation. He had no idea that his experience would determine the future of company policies, the careers of crew members, the culture of an entire airline. All he knew was that he was being watched, judged, and questioned in ways that felt familiar from a lifetime of being one of the few black faces in predominantly white spaces. His mother had taught him how to handle these moments with grace, dignity, and quiet strength. What she had also taught him was when to call for backup. As Flight 847 climbed toward cruising altitude and the first-class service began, Jamal kept reading his book, but in the back of his mind he was also keeping count. Count of the suspicious looks, count of the extra questions, count of the small humiliations that people like Henderson and Maria probably thought were invisible. His mother had taught him to document everything, to remember everything, to speak up when speaking up was necessary. That moment was coming soon. Victoria Rodriguez built Apex Airways on a foundation of being told no. No, you can't be a pilot. No airlines don't hire women like you. No passengers won't feel comfortable with a Latina in the cockpit. No investors won't trust a company run by someone who looks like you. No, you don't understand how the aviation industry really works. 25 years later, Victoria's company employed more pilots, served more routes, and generated more revenue than any of the airlines that had rejected her. Apex Airways had become a giant in the industry, not despite her identity, but because of what her identity had taught her about respect, dignity, and the radical power of treating every human being like they mattered. But success hadn't made her forget. If anything, success had given her the platform and the resources to fight against the same discrimination she had faced. Victoria Rodriguez didn't just run an airline. She ran a mission to prove that respect shouldn't depend on appearance, background, or assumptions about who belonged where. That mission had led to policies that set Apex Airways apart from its competitors, diversity hiring initiatives that had transformed the industry, anti-discrimination training that other airlines had copied, a company culture built on the simple idea that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, or so Victoria had thought. The anonymous reports had started 6 months ago. Emails sent to the corporate complaint system from passengers who had witnessed disturbing behavior on specific routes. Flight 847 Chicago to Los Angeles was mentioned again and again. Stories of black passengers being questioned about their tickets. Latino families being subjected to extra security checks. Young people of color being treated with suspicion and hostility by crew members. The reports were detailed, specific, and deeply troubling, but they were also hard to investigate. By the time corporate got involved, flights had landed, crews had dispersed, and everyone had different versions of what had happened. Passengers moved on with their lives. Crew members cited policy and procedure. Investigations stalled in a maze of he said, she said testimony that never quite produced actionable evidence. Victoria had tried everything. She had sent corporate investigators posing as passengers, but somehow the problematic behavior never happened when official eyes were watching. She had reviewed security footage, but cameras didn't capture tone of voice, subtle facial expressions, or the thousand small ways that bias expressed itself. She had interviewed crew members, but everyone insisted they followed protocol exactly and treated all passengers with equal respect. After 5 months of investigation, the official conclusion was clear. No evidence of discriminatory behavior had been found. Case closed. Victoria Rodriguez hadn't become a billionaire by accepting conclusions that didn't make sense. If traditional investigations couldn't capture what was happening, she would have to get creative. She would have to experience it firsthand. But as the CEO of Apex Airways, Victoria couldn't exactly go undercover without being recognized by every employee in the company. Her son, however, was a different story. Jamal had grown up around the airline industry, but he had never shown much interest in the business side of his mother's work. He was focused on school, on social justice, on his plans to become a civil rights attorney. Most Apex employees had never met him. To the crew of Flight 847, Jamal Rodriguez would be just another passenger. A passenger who happened to fit the exact profile described in all those anonymous complaints. Victoria had booked Jamal's ticket herself using her personal credit card, but registering it under a generic customer account that wouldn't flag him as a VIP. She had chosen first class not as a luxury, but as a test. The discrimination reports consistently mentioned issues with passengers of color in premium cabins, as if certain crew members believed that first class was reserved for certain types of people. She had told Jamal the ticket was a graduation gift, which wasn't exactly a lie. She was proud of his academic achievements, proud of the young man he was becoming, proud of the way he handled difficult situations with the grace and dignity she had tried to teach him. What she hadn't told him was that this flight was also a test of whether the company she had built, the culture she had created, the values she had instilled were really working the way she believed they were. Now, from her corner office on the 40th floor of the Apex Airways headquarters building in Chicago, Victoria was tracking Flight 847 in real time. Company executives had access to comprehensive flight monitoring systems that showed everything from altitude and speed to passenger manifests and crew assignments. Victoria could see that her son was in seat 1A. She could see that the lead flight attendant was Maria Gonzalez, a 15-year employee with generally positive performance reviews. She could see that Captain Robert Mitchell was in command, another veteran employee with a clean record and 2 years until retirement. On paper, everything looked normal. Professional crew routine flight, nothing to suggest any problems. But Victoria had learned not to trust what things looked like on paper. Her assistant knocked on the door and entered with a tablet full of morning briefings. Ma'am, the assistant said, we've got the quarterly diversity metrics you requested, the union negotiation updates, and the FAA compliance reports. Victoria nodded, but didn't look away from her computer screen. Flight 847 was climbing through 28,000 feet on schedule, no reported issues. Thank you, Carmen. Can you hold my calls for the next hour? I'm monitoring a situation. Carmen Martinez had been Victoria's assistant for 8 years. She had learned to read her boss's moods, her concerns, her tells. When Victoria Rodriguez was monitoring a situation, it usually meant something important was happening, something that required her complete attention. Of course, Carmen said. Should I alert the crisis management team? Not yet, Victoria replied, but have them on standby. As Carmen left the office, Victoria opened a second monitor showing social media feeds related to Apex Airways. It was a routine part of corporate monitoring, tracking what passengers were saying about their experiences in real time. Usually it was complaints about delayed flights, praise for good service, or the occasional viral video of passengers behaving badly. Today, Victoria noticed something different. Several posts from Flight 847 were already appearing tagged with the plane's flight number and gate information, passengers taking photos and videos commenting about drama at the gate and suspicious crew behavior. Victoria's stomach tightened. It was starting exactly the way the anonymous complaints had described. She opened another window and pulled up the personnel files for Flight 847's crew. Maria Gonzalez, 15 years of service, generally positive passenger feedback. No disciplinary actions on record. Captain Robert Mitchell, 25 years of experience, clean safety record scheduled for retirement in 2 years. First Officer David Park, 8 years with the company, solid performance reviews, no red flags. On paper, they looked like model employees. But Victoria had learned that bias didn't always show up in personnel files. Sometimes the worst discrimination came from people who genuinely believed they were doing their jobs correctly, maintaining standards, protecting the company's reputation. Sometimes discrimination looked like professionalism. Sometimes it sounded like policy. Sometimes it hid behind procedures and protocols that seemed neutral on the surface, but were applied differently depending on who the passenger was. Victoria picked up her phone and dialed a number she hoped she would never have to use. Crisis management. This is Dave. Dave, this is Victoria. I need you to prepare for a potential passenger incident on Flight 847 Chicago to Los Angeles. No action yet, just preparation. What kind of incident? Discrimination. Possibly filmed. Possibly going viral. I want legal PR and executive response teams ready to move if this escalates. There was a pause. Ma'am, is this related to those anonymous complaints about the Chicago-LAX route? It might be, Victoria said. I'll know more in the next hour. Victoria hung up and returned to her monitors. Flight 847 was now at cruising altitude, beginning in-flight service. On social media, more posts were appearing. Photos of a young black passenger being questioned by crew members. Videos of tense interactions in the first-class cabin. Comments wondering if they were witnessing another viral discrimination incident. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from Jamal Flight. Going fine, Mom. Reading a good book. Love you. Victoria stared at the message. Her son was trying to reassure her, but she could read between the lines. Jamal was careful with his words. When he said going fine, he usually meant challenging but manageable. When he mentioned reading it, often meant he was using books as a shield against uncomfortable situations. She texted back, "Remember what I taught you about standing up for yourself. You're never alone. Love you too." What Victoria didn't say in her text was that she was watching. What she didn't say was that she was prepared to bring the full weight of her company, her legal team, and her personal power to bear if anyone hurt her son. What she didn't say was that the anonymous reports about Flight 847 had been more than concerning. They had been infuriating. They had described a pattern of behavior that was everything Apex Airways claimed to stand against everything Victoria Rodriguez had spent her career fighting. If those reports were accurate, if her son was experiencing what other passengers had experienced, then someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between having power and using it wisely. Victoria Rodriguez had built an empire on the principle that everyone deserved respect. She had not built that empire to watch it become another place where young people like her son were made to feel like they didn't belong. She opened one more window on her computer, the direct line to Apex Airways Board of Directors. If this situation escalated, if her worst fears were confirmed, the board would need to be notified immediately. Discrimination incidents that went viral could destroy airlines. Stock prices could collapse overnight. Years of reputation building could disappear in a matter of hours. But Victoria wasn't thinking about stock prices or board meetings. She was thinking about her 18-year-old son sitting in seat 1A of Flight 847, trying to read his book while people who worked for her company decided whether he deserved to be treated with dignity. If they decided wrong, Victoria Rodriguez was prepared to remind them exactly who they worked for. Service in first class began exactly 11 minutes after takeoff, which was standard protocol for Flight 847. Maria Gonzalez approached the premium cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual thousands of times. Leather-bound menus, pre-flight beverages, warm towels, and the kind of attentive service that made $3,000 tickets feel worth the price for most passengers. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," Maria said warmly as she stopped beside seat 1B. "The usual for you today." Mimosa and the Salmon Benedict William Henderson III looked up from his Wall Street Journal with the satisfied smile of a man who was recognized, valued, and treated according to his status. "You know me too well, Maria. And could you make sure my dry cleaning is ready when we land? I have a meeting at 4. "Already confirmed," Maria replied. "Your usual car service will have everything waiting." Henderson nodded approvingly. This was how first class was supposed to work. Personal service, attention to detail, recognition of loyalty. He glanced sideways at Jamal in seat 1A, still reading his book, headphones on, minding his own business. Maria moved to stand beside Jamal's seat. She cleared her throat loudly. Jamal looked up and removed one earbud. "Yes, I need to confirm your meal preference," Maria said, but her tone was noticeably different. Colder, more formal. She didn't offer the leather-bound menu that Henderson had received. Instead, she held a laminated card with basic options. "We have chicken or pasta available in economy meal service." Jamal blinked. "I'm sorry, I thought first class had different meal options. First class meals are pre-ordered," Maria said, her voice carrying enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Since your ticket was purchased last minute, we don't have your preferences on file. We can offer you the standard options, or you can wait to see if we have any extra premium meals available." Henderson leaned forward, slightly interested in the conversation. In his 15 years of flying first class, he had never pre-ordered a meal. The premium options had always been available to anyone in the first class cabin. "I didn't know I needed to pre-order," Jamal said politely. "Could I see the first class menu?" Maria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll check what we have available," she said. "But I want to manage your expectations. Premium service requires premium planning." As Maria walked away, Henderson caught her eye and nodded approvingly. The kid needed to understand how things worked up here. First class wasn't just about buying a ticket. It was about understanding the culture, the expectations, the way things were done. In seat 3C, Jessica Miller was recording everything. She had her phone positioned to look like she was texting, but she was actually capturing video of the interaction between Jamal and the flight attendant. What she was seeing was textbook discrimination. Different treatment disguised as policy rules applied inconsistently, and the kind of subtle humiliation that people in power use to remind others of their place. Maria returned to Jamal's seat carrying a single laminated sheet. "This is what we have available," she announced, holding the paper just out of easy reach so Jamal had to lean forward to see it. Chicken with vegetables or pasta with marinara sauce. Jamal looked at the basic menu, then glanced at Henderson's table, where an elaborate salmon dish was being prepared by a crew member. "Could I have the salmon?" he asked. "That's a premium selection," Maria said. "It requires advance ordering and additional payment." "How much additional payment?" Maria paused, clearly not having expected the question. "I'll have to check with the captain," she said. "But I believe it's $50 additional plus tax. Henderson's salmon dish cost exactly $0 additional dollars. It was included with his first-class ticket, just like every other premium meal option in the cabin." But Henderson didn't speak up. He was enjoying watching the flight attendant teach the kid about how things really worked. $50 is fine," Jamal said quietly. "I'll have the salmon." Maria's expression flickered with annoyance. This wasn't going according to plan. "I'll see what I can do," she said curtly, walking away. For the next 20 minutes, service continued around Jamal as if he wasn't there. Other first-class passengers received warm towels, beverage refills, and attentive conversation from the crew. Jamal sat reading his book occasionally, glancing up as flight attendants bustled past his seat without making eye contact. Finally, Maria returned with a plate. She set it down in front of Jamal without ceremony. No explanation of the dish. No offer of beverage pairing, none of the presentation that other passengers had received. The salmon was cold. The vegetables were overcooked. The sauce had separated. It looked like a meal that had been sitting in the galley for an hour, reheated in a microwave and served with resentment. $53.47, Maria announced, holding out a payment device, including tax and service charge. Jamal looked at the sad plate of food, then at Henderson's beautiful presentation, then back at Maria. "Service charge. 15% gratuity for premium meal service," Maria said. "It's standard." It wasn't standard. Premium meals were included with first-class tickets, no additional charges, no service fees, no gratuity required. But Jamal didn't know that. He pulled out his debit card and paid the $53.47 for a meal that looked like it belonged in an airport food court. As soon as the payment went through, Maria's demeanor shifted slightly. She had proven her point. The kid might have a first-class ticket, but he didn't understand first-class rules. He could be manipulated, charged extra, treated as less than the real passengers. "Enjoy your meal," Maria said, but her tone suggested she hoped he wouldn't. Henderson watched this entire exchange with growing satisfaction. This was exactly why airlines needed experienced crew members who understood standards. The flight attendant was maintaining the integrity of the first-class experience, making sure that passengers who belonged felt comfortable and passengers who didn't belong understood their place. But Henderson's satisfaction was about to turn into something much more active. As Jamal ate his disappointing $53 salmon, Henderson reached into his jacket pocket for his money clip. It was a Cartier piece, sterling silver, with his initials engraved, containing about $800 in cash and several platinum credit cards. Henderson always carried cash for tips, unexpected expenses, and the kind of situations where credit cards weren't sufficient to demonstrate wealth and status. Henderson felt around in his pocket. Nothing. He checked his other jacket pocket. Empty. He patted down his pants pockets, his carry-on bag, the seat pocket in front of him. His money clip was gone. Henderson's mind immediately went to the most logical explanation: someone had stolen it, and there was only one person in first class who fit the profile of someone who might steal money from a fellow passenger. "Excuse me," Henderson called loudly, making sure his voice carried throughout the first-class cabin. "I need a flight attendant immediately." Maria appeared quickly, sensing urgency. "What can I help you with, Mr. Henderson?" "My money clip is missing," Henderson announced, his voice loud enough to get the attention of every passenger in the cabin. "It was in my jacket pocket when I boarded, and now it's gone." It contained $800 in cash and several credit cards. Maria's expression immediately became serious. A theft allegation was a federal crime, especially on an aircraft. When did you last see it? Before takeoff, Henderson said. I specifically remember checking it when I sat down. He looked directly at Jamal, making sure everyone understood his implication. Since then, there's only been one person moving around this cabin who shouldn't be here. The entire first-class cabin went silent. Conversations stopped. Newspapers were lowered. Every passenger turned to look at Jamal, who was still sitting quietly, eating his cold salmon, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Sir Maria said to Henderson, "Are you suggesting that another passenger took your money clip?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Henderson replied. "I'm stating facts. My money was there when I sat down. Now it's gone. And there's only one person in this cabin who doesn't belong here." Jamal looked up from his book, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at him. "I'm sorry. Is everything okay?" "Everything is not okay," Henderson snapped. "Someone stole my money and I want security called immediately." Maria moved to stand beside Jamal's seat. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me to the galley for a moment." "Why?" Jamal asked. "There's been a theft reported," Maria explained. "We need to search your belongings and your person to rule you out as a suspect." Jamal set down his book and looked around the cabin. Every passenger was watching him, most with expressions that suggested they had already decided he was guilty. "You want to search me because someone's money is missing?" "It's standard procedure," Maria said, though it absolutely was not standard procedure. "We need to eliminate all possibilities." "What about searching everyone else's belongings?" Jamal asked. Henderson laughed harshly. "Are you serious? I've been flying first class with this airline for 15 years. I'm a Diamond Medallion member. You think I'm going to steal my own money?" Maria nodded toward the galley. "Sir, I need you to come with me now or I'll have to call the captain and we'll have to discuss having police meet the aircraft." Jamal felt the familiar weight in his chest that came with these moments. The same feeling he had experienced when teachers assumed he was in advanced classes because of affirmative action instead of his 4.0 GPA. The same feeling when store security followed him through department stores. The same feeling when people assumed he didn't belong in spaces where he had every right to be. But his mother had taught him something important. Dignity was not something other people could take from you. It was something you chose to keep. "I'll come with you," Jamal said quietly. "But I want everyone to know that I didn't take anything from anyone." As Jamal stood up, Henderson called out loudly, "Check his bag too. And his pockets. Cash is easy to hide." The walk from seat 1A to the first-class galley felt like a perp walk. Every passenger watched as Jamal followed Maria, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust to satisfied judgment. In their minds, the script was already written: young black man in expensive seat he probably didn't pay for, caught stealing from a legitimate first-class passenger. In the galley, Maria was joined by another flight attendant, Sarah, who looked deeply uncomfortable with what was happening but didn't speak up. "I need you to empty your pockets," Maria said. "Everything." Jamal placed his phone wallet, earbuds, and a pack of gum on the galley counter. Maria examined each item carefully, opening his wallet to count his cash, $43, checking his phone for recent photos or messages that might suggest theft. "Now I need to check your carry-on bag," Maria said. They went back to Jamal's seat where his backpack was still in the overhead bin. As Maria pulled it down, Henderson watched approvingly, nodding to other passengers as if to say, "Finally, someone is taking this seriously." Maria unzipped the backpack and began removing items: textbooks, notebooks, a laptop, a change of clothes, toiletries, phone chargers. She examined everything, shaking out books to see if cash might fall out, checking laptop cases, going through every pocket of every piece of clothing. "Nothing," Sarah whispered, but Maria shot her a look that clearly said, "Keep quiet." "Check the seat cushions," Henderson suggested loudly. Maybe he hid it there. Maria actually did check the seat cushions around Jamal's seat, running her hands along the leather checking seat pockets, looking under the seat for any sign of a hidden money clip. Still nothing. The search had been going on for 15 minutes, and other first-class passengers were starting to look uncomfortable. This was not the kind of peaceful luxury experience they had paid for. A young black man being publicly humiliated and searched like a common criminal was not what they expected to see at 35,000 feet. "Maybe you should check everyone's belongings," suggested a woman in seat 2D, her voice carrying a tone that implied she was tired of watching this spectacle. "That won't be necessary," Henderson snapped. "I know who I was sitting next to. I know who was moving around. I know what I saw." But Henderson hadn't actually seen anything. He had simply noticed his money clip was missing and decided that the most obvious suspect was the person who looked like they didn't belong in first class. Sir Maria said to Jamal, "I'm going to need you to submit to a more thorough personal search, or we'll have to involve law enforcement when we land." That was the moment. The moment when Jamal Rodriguez realized that no amount of politeness, cooperation, or dignity was going to stop what was happening to him. These people had decided he was guilty before they even looked for evidence. They weren't interested in finding the real truth. They were interested in confirming their biases. Jamal thought about his mother sitting in her office 40,000 feet below, probably tracking his flight, hoping he was having a peaceful journey to college orientation. He thought about the lessons she had taught him about handling discrimination with grace. But he also thought about the other lesson she had taught him. Sometimes grace wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to call for backup. "I want to make a phone call," Jamal said quietly. "You can make all the phone calls you want when we land," Maria replied. "Right now we need to complete this search. I want to make a phone call now." Jamal repeated, his voice still quiet but carrying a new edge of steel. "It's my legal right," Henderson laughed. "Legal right? You think this is a courtroom? You're on an aircraft, kid. Different rules up here." Jamal pulled out his phone and scrolled to his contacts. CEO Mom. His thumb hovered over the call button for just a moment. His mother had always told him to try to handle difficult situations himself first, to use his education, his intelligence, his dignity to navigate challenges. But she had also told him that there were times when asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. This was one of those times. "I'm calling my mother," Jamal said. "Mommy can't help you now," Henderson sneered. "Tell her to hire you a good lawyer." Maria reached for Jamal's phone. "Sir, you need to put that away and comply with the search." "Don't touch my phone," Jamal said, pulling it back. His voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. The steel his mother had taught him to find when people tried to take his dignity. He pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then, "Jamal baby, are you okay? You're supposed to be on your flight." "Mom." Jamal said, his voice steady and clear, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "I need you to know what your employees are doing." Victoria Rodriguez, CEO of Apex Airways, was sitting in her corner office when her son's call came through. She had been monitoring Flight 847 all morning, watching social media posts tracking the aircraft's progress, hoping that her worst fears wouldn't be confirmed. When she saw Jamal's name on her caller ID, her stomach dropped. "What employees, baby? What's happening?" "I'm being accused of stealing money from another passenger," Jamal said, his voice carrying throughout the first-class cabin. "They've searched my belongings, they want to search my body, and they're threatening to have me arrested when we land. All because a man lost his money clip and decided I must have taken it." Victoria Rodriguez felt something cold and dangerous settle in her chest. "Are you on speakerphone?" "No, but everyone can hear me." "Good. I want them to hear me too." "Put me on speaker." Jamal pressed the speaker button. His mother's voice filled the first-class cabin, clear and commanding. "This is Victoria Rodriguez, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Airways. To whoever is in charge of this situation, you have exactly 30 seconds to explain to me why my son is being treated like a criminal on one of my aircraft." The first-class cabin went dead silent. Henderson's face went white. Maria's hands began to shake. Even Captain Mitchell, who had been avoiding the drama in the cabin, suddenly appeared in the galley doorway. "Mrs. Rodriguez." Maria stammered. "There's been a misunderstanding, Ms. Rodriguez," Victoria corrected sharply. "And there's been no misunderstanding. There's been discrimination. There's been racial profiling. And there's been a violation of company policy that I am personally going to investigate." Henderson tried to salvage the situation. "Ma'am, I'm William Henderson, Diamond Medallion member. There's been a theft, Mr. Henderson." Victoria's voice cut through his explanation like a laser. "Are you the passenger who accused my son of stealing without any evidence? Are you the person who decided that a young black man in first class must be a criminal? The money clip was missing. Have you found this money clip?" Henderson felt around his jacket again, then his pants pockets, then... His hand stopped. There was something in his inside jacket pocket, the one he hadn't checked carefully. Something metal. Something familiar. With growing horror, Henderson slowly pulled out his Cartier money clip exactly where he had put it that morning, exactly where it had been the entire time. "Oh," Henderson whispered. "Oh." Victoria's voice could have cut diamond. "Oh, is that your confession that you falsely accused my son of theft? Is that your admission that you racially profiled an innocent passenger? Is that your acknowledgement that you have just destroyed your relationship with this airline?" The entire cabin watched as Henderson stared at the money clip in his hand. The money clip that had never been stolen. The money clip that had been in his inside jacket pocket the entire time, the money clip that had just destroyed his credibility and exposed his bias for everyone to see. It was just... I thought... Henderson stammered. "You thought what exactly Victoria asked? You thought a young black man in first class must be a thief? You thought someone who looks like my son couldn't possibly belong in a premium cabin? You thought you could destroy a teenager's reputation based on your prejudices?" Maria tried to interject. "Ms. Rodriguez, we were just following standard security procedures." "Standard procedures?" Victoria's voice rose. "Since when is it standard procedure to conduct a personal search of a passenger based on an accusation without evidence? Since when is it standard procedure to assume guilt based on appearance? Since when is it standard procedure to threaten arrest without involving law enforcement properly?" Captain Mitchell stepped forward. "Ma'am, if I may explain." "Captain Mitchell," Victoria said, and the fact that she knew his name sent a chill through the crew. "You were in command of this aircraft when my son was being humiliated by your crew. You allowed this to happen. You are responsible." The phone conversation was being heard not just by the first-class passengers, but by people throughout the aircraft. Flight attendants in economy were listening, passengers were recording. The entire situation was being documented by dozens of phones uploaded to social media platforms, shared with thousands of people who were witnessing a young black man being vindicated by the most powerful woman in the aviation industry. Jamal Victoria said, her voice softening slightly when she addressed her son. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm okay, Mom," Jamal replied. "Just tired." "I know, baby. I'm so sorry this happened to you. And I'm so proud of how you handled it." Then her voice hardened again. "But this is not okay. This is not who we are as a company. This is not what Apex Airways stands for." Victoria paused, and everyone in the cabin could hear her typing on a keyboard. "Captain Mitchell, I am issuing an emergency directive. Flight 847 is to continue to Los Angeles as scheduled. Upon landing, you, lead flight attendant Maria Gonzalez, and gate agent Brad Thompson are to report immediately to the Airport Operations Center. Your employment with Apex Airways is terminated effective immediately. The cabin erupted in gasps. Passengers looked around at each other with shock and satisfaction. Justice was happening in real time at 35,000 feet, broadcast live for everyone to see. Mr. Henderson Victoria continued, "Your Diamond Medallion membership is hereby revoked. Your frequent flyer account is closed. You are permanently banned from flying with Apex Airways or any of our partner airlines. Your ticket for this flight has been refunded, which means you are technically trespassing on this aircraft, but I will allow you to complete this journey. Consider it my final act of generosity toward you." Henderson sat in stunned silence, holding his money clip, realizing that his prejudice had just cost him everything. Jamal Victoria said, "I love you. Enjoy the rest of your flight. Enjoy college orientation. And remember what I taught you about dignity." "I love you too, Mom," Jamal replied. "Thank you." The call ended, but the impact was just beginning. The silence in the first-class cabin after Victoria Rodriguez ended the call was deafening. It was the kind of silence that follows an earthquake when everyone is still processing what just happened and wondering what's going to collapse next. Henderson sat frozen in seat 1B, still holding his money clip, staring at it like it was evidence of his own stupidity, which in a way it was. The expensive piece of sterling silver that he had used to validate his suspicions about Jamal had turned out to be exactly where he had left it, exactly where it had always been, exactly where it proved that his accusations had been based on nothing but his own bias. Maria Gonzalez stood in the aisle, her face pale, her hands shaking slightly as the reality of what Victoria Rodriguez had just said began to sink in. 15 years with Apex Airways. 15 years of building a career, earning seniority, working her way up from regional routes to premium domestic flights. All of it was gone now, terminated by a phone call that had lasted less than 5 minutes. Captain Mitchell remained in the galley doorway, looking like a man who had just watched his retirement plans evaporate. 25 years of flying, thousands of hours in the cockpit, a pension that was supposed to support him and his wife for the rest of their lives. All of it destroyed because he had chosen to look the other way when his crew was discriminating against a passenger. But the most dramatic change was in Jamal himself. The quiet, polite teenager who had been reading his book and trying to avoid confrontation was still there. But now there was something else, something that had been revealed not just to the other passengers, but to Jamal himself. He wasn't just another passenger who could be pushed around, accused, and humiliated. He was the son of the most powerful woman in the aviation industry. He had backup that could move mountains. More importantly, he had a mother who believed in him absolutely, who would use every resource at her disposal to protect him, and who would burn down anyone who tried to hurt him. The first passenger to break the silence was Jessica Miller in seat 3C. She had been recording the entire incident on her phone, and she had just witnessed something that was going to go viral within hours. That Jessica said loud enough for everyone to hear was absolutely incredible. Other passengers began to murmur agreement. A businessman in seat 2F started clapping slowly. The woman in seat 2D smiled and nodded approvingly. Even passengers from economy class were stretching into the aisle, trying to get a look at the young man who had just called his mother and brought down the entire flight crew. Jamal said a voice from across the aisle. It was Dr. Patricia Williams, a cardiologist from Chicago who had watched the entire incident unfold with growing anger. "I owe you an apology." Jamal looked up from his phone where he was receiving a stream of supportive text messages from his mother. "I watched what they were doing to you," Dr. Williams continued, "and I didn't speak up. I knew it was wrong. I knew you were being treated unfairly, but I stayed quiet because it was easier than getting involved. I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize," Jamal replied quietly, "but thank you." "No," Dr. Williams insisted, "I do need to apologize, because staying quiet when you see injustice makes you part of the problem. Your mother just reminded me of that." Around the cabin, other passengers were nodding, understanding exactly what Dr. Williams meant. They had all watched a young black man being humiliated and accused of theft, and most of them had stayed quiet either because they agreed with what was happening or because they didn't want to get involved. Now they were realizing that their silence had enabled discrimination to happen right in front of them. Henderson finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jamal, I need to say something." Jamal looked at him with an expression that was calm but guarded. "Okay." "I was wrong," Henderson said, and the words seemed to cost him enormous effort. "I lost my money clip. I panicked, and instead of looking for it properly, I immediately assumed you had taken it because—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Because I'm black," Jamal said simply. Henderson winced. "Yes, because you're black, and because I thought someone like you didn't belong in first class. And I was wrong about all of it. I was completely, totally wrong." "Yes," Jamal said. "You were." "I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything," Henderson continued, "but I want you to know that I understand what I did. I racially profiled you. I tried to have you arrested for something I did, and I destroyed my own life in the process." Jamal studied Henderson for a long moment. "Mr. Henderson, do you know what my mother taught me about apologies? What she taught me? That apologies are only meaningful if they come with changed behavior. If you're really sorry, you won't just apologize to me. You'll think about all the other times you've made assumptions about people based on how they look. You'll examine your own biases, and you'll do better." Henderson nodded slowly. "You're right, and you're much more mature than I am." "I had a good teacher," Jamal said, thinking of his mother. Captain Mitchell approached Jamal's seat, his face gray with stress and regret. "Son, I know I don't have any right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I should have stopped what was happening to you. I should have investigated properly. I should have protected you instead of hiding in the cockpit." Jamal looked up at the man who had just lost his career. "Captain, why didn't you speak up?" Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, because it was easier not to. Because I'm 2 years from retirement and I didn't want any trouble. Because I told myself it wasn't my responsibility to get involved in cabin disputes." "But it was your responsibility," Jamal said. "You were in command." "Yes," Mitchell said. "I was. And I failed. I failed you. I failed my job, and I failed everything I thought I stood for." Maria Gonzalez had been standing silently in the aisle, but now she stepped forward. Her face was streaked with tears, and her hands were still shaking. "Jamal," she said, her voice breaking, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to listen to me. But I need to say this. What I did to you was evil. I treated you like a criminal because of how you looked. I made up rules that didn't exist. I charged you for a meal that should have been free. I humiliated you in front of everyone." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I became everything I hate about discrimination. I became the reason why your mother started getting those anonymous complaints. I became the problem." "Why?" Jamal asked simply. "Why did you do it?" Maria struggled to answer. Because I thought first class was supposed to look a certain way. Because I thought I was protecting the experience for other passengers. Because I let my biases control my actions instead of treating every passenger with respect." "Those aren't reasons," Jamal said. "Those are excuses." "You're right," Maria said. "There is no reason. There's no excuse. I was wrong, and now I have to live with what I did." Throughout this conversation, other passengers were listening and learning. Many of them were realizing that they had their own biases, their own assumptions, their own moments when they had stayed quiet instead of speaking up. Jessica Miller, who had been recording everything, posted a message on her social media. "Just witnessed the most incredible display of dignity and justice I've ever seen. A young black man was falsely accused of theft, publicly humiliated, and threatened with arrest. When he called his mother for help, we discovered she was the CEO of the airline. What happened next was absolute justice. This young man handled discrimination with more grace and maturity than any of the adults around him. The post was shared hundreds of times within minutes. The video Jessica had recorded was viewed thousands of times before the plane even landed. Justice at 35,000 feet began trending on social media platforms. But back in the first-class cabin, something more important than viral fame was happening. A conversation about dignity, respect, and responsibility was taking place. A young black man who had been accused and humiliated was showing his accusers what grace looked like under pressure. "You know what the hardest part of this was?" Jamal said, addressing the group of passengers and crew members who were hanging on his every word. It wasn't being accused of stealing. It wasn't being searched. It wasn't even being threatened with arrest. "What was the hardest part?" Dr. Williams asked. "The hardest part was realizing that if I hadn't been able to call my mother, if I didn't have someone powerful enough to protect me, this would have ended differently. I would have been arrested when we landed. I would have been charged with theft. My life would have been destroyed over a money clip that was never even missing." The cabin was silent as everyone absorbed this truth. How many other young black men and women have gone through this same thing without anyone to call? Jamal continued. How many people have been accused, humiliated, and arrested because someone made assumptions about them based on their appearance? Henderson, who had been mostly quiet since finding his money clip, spoke up again. "I never thought about that. I never considered what could have happened to you if I hadn't been connected to power." Jamal finished. "That's the point. Justice shouldn't depend on who you know. Respect shouldn't depend on who your mother is. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, not just the people with powerful friends." Dr. Williams nodded. "Your mother didn't just defend you today. She defended a principle, the principle that everyone matters regardless of their background. That's what she built her company on," Jamal said. "The idea that respect shouldn't be a luxury item." As Flight 847 began its descent into Los Angeles, the atmosphere in the cabin had completely transformed. What had started as a routine flight punctuated by discrimination had become an impromptu seminar on bias privilege and the importance of speaking up when witnessing injustice. Passengers were exchanging contact information. People were talking about ways to be better allies when they witnessed discrimination. Several passengers said they planned to donate to civil rights organizations when they landed. But perhaps most importantly, everyone in that cabin had been reminded that their actions mattered. Their choices to speak up or stay silent, to stand with victims, or enable perpetrators to examine their own biases or ignore them, had real consequences for real people. When the plane touched down at LAX, Jamal gathered his belongings and prepared to disembark. But before he left his seat, he turned to address the first-class cabin one more time. "I want everyone to know that I don't hate anyone here. Not Mr. Henderson, not Maria, not Captain Mitchell. What happened today was wrong, but it was also educational. For all of us." He paused, looking around at the faces watching him. "My mother always tells me that the goal isn't to punish people for their mistakes. The goal is to help them learn from their mistakes so they don't make them again. What happened to me today shouldn't happen to anyone else. Ever." As Jamal walked off the plane, followed by spontaneous applause from passengers in both first class and economy, he carried with him the knowledge that his experience had changed people. Not just the crew members who had lost their jobs, not just Henderson who had lost his privileges, but the witnesses who had seen how quickly assumptions could become accusations, how easily bias could destroy lives, and how powerful one voice could be when it refused to stay silent. Most importantly, Jamal carried with him a deeper understanding of the legacy his mother had built, and the responsibility that came with the Rodriguez family name. He wasn't just the son of a powerful CEO. He was the heir to a mission that extended far beyond airline seats and corporate profits. He was part of a fight for dignity that his mother had been waging long before he was born, and that would continue long after both of them were gone. The Los Angeles International Airport Operations Center had never seen anything like it. By the time Flight 847 touched down at LAX, Victoria Rodriguez was already on her private jet flying from Chicago to Los Angeles with a team of lawyers, HR executives, and crisis management specialists. The video footage from Jessica Miller had been shared over 50,000 times. News outlets were calling Apex Airways headquarters for comment. The story was trending on multiple social media platforms under hashtags like Justice at 35,000 feet and Dignity Matters. But Victoria Rodriguez wasn't thinking about social media or crisis management. She was thinking about her son and about the fact that employees of the company she had built were treating passengers exactly the way she had been treated 25 years ago when she was trying to become a pilot. Jamal was waiting in the terminal when his mother's jet landed. He had spent the hour since deplaning talking to airport security, giving his statement about what had happened on Flight 847 and watching news reports about the incident on airport televisions. Passengers from his flight kept approaching him, wanting to shake his hand, take selfies, tell him how impressed they were with his composure. When Victoria Rodriguez walked through the airport toward him, flanked by her security detail and legal team, Jamal saw something in her face that he had rarely seen before: fury. Not anger, which was temporary and hot, but fury, which was cold and permanent and dangerous. "Baby," Victoria said, pulling him into a hug that was fierce and protective and full of all the love she hadn't been able to send through a phone call. "Are you okay? Really?" "Okay." "I'm okay, Mom," Jamal said. "I handled it the way you taught me." "You handled it perfectly," Victoria said, holding him at arm's length so she could look at his face. "I'm so proud of you, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was," Victoria said firmly. "Those were my employees. That was my aircraft. That happened because I failed to create a culture where discrimination was impossible, instead of just against policy." Behind them, Victoria's legal team was already working. Phones were buzzing with calls from federal aviation authorities, civil rights organizations, and media outlets wanting statements. The incident on Flight 847 was becoming a national news story, and Apex Airways was at the center of it. "Ma'am," said David Martinez, Victoria's head of legal affairs, approaching with a tablet full of documents. "We need to discuss the immediate response strategy." "The immediate response is simple," Victoria said. "Zero tolerance, complete accountability, and comprehensive reform. The crew members who were terminated are already requesting meetings with their union representatives," David continued. "Captain Mitchell is claiming his pension rights. Maria Gonzalez is threatening a wrongful termination lawsuit. Brad Thompson from the gate is saying he was following standard security protocols." Victoria's expression didn't change. "Let them file their lawsuits. Let them claim whatever they want to claim. What they did to my son was captured on video by multiple passengers. Their actions speak for themselves." "There's also the matter of Mr. Henderson," David said. "He's reached out through his attorney requesting a meeting to discuss reversing the ban. He's claiming emotional distress and suggesting that his reaction was understandable given the circumstances." "Henderson is permanently banned," Victoria said. "No exceptions, no appeals, no meetings. He falsely accused my son of theft based solely on racial profiling. He tried to have an innocent teenager arrested. The ban stands." As Victoria's team handled the legal and operational aspects of the crisis, she and Jamal were escorted to a private conference room in the airport where they could talk without being interrupted by media or other passengers. "Tell me everything," Victoria said once they were alone. "Every detail, every word, every look. I need to understand exactly what happened so I can make sure it never happens again." For the next hour, Jamal recounted the entire experience. The gate agent who had immediately assumed he was in the wrong line. The flight attendant who had treated him differently from other first-class passengers. The fake charges for his meal. The passenger who had accused him of theft without evidence. the crew who had conducted an illegal search based on nothing but assumptions. Victoria listened to every word, her expression growing darker with each detail. The meal charges, Victoria said when Jamal finished. They charged you $53 for a meal that should have been included with your ticket. Yes, that's theft, Victoria said. They stole $53 from you by fabricating charges that don't exist. Victoria picked up her phone and made a call. Carmen, I need you to pull the catering receipts for Flight 847 today. I want to know exactly what meals were served, what they cost, and who paid for them. Yes, right now. Email it to me in the next 10 minutes. When the email arrived, Victoria's suspicions were confirmed. The salmon dish that Jamal had been charged $53 for was the same salmon dish that had been served free to every other first-class passenger. Maria Gonzalez had literally invented charges to extract money from Jamal. This wasn't just discrimination, Victoria said, showing Jamal the receipt. This was fraud. They stole money from you while they were humiliating you. What does that mean? It means Maria Gonzalez is going to face criminal charges in addition to losing her job, Victoria said. Defrauding passengers is a federal crime. Over the next several hours, the consequences of Flight 847 began to cascade through the aviation industry. Videos of the incident were being played on national news programs. Aviation experts were being interviewed about discrimination in air travel. Civil rights organizations were calling for federal investigations into airline bias practices. But the most significant consequences were happening within Apex Airways itself. Victoria had called an emergency meeting of the company's board of directors scheduled for the following morning in Chicago. She had ordered a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints filed in the past 2 years. She had suspended the entire crew assignment structure that had put the Flight 847 team together, and she had authorized the creation of a new position, Chief Equality Officer, reporting directly to her. I want someone whose only job is to prevent what happened to Jamal from ever happening to anyone else, Victoria explained to her executive team during a conference call from the LAX airport office. I want someone with the authority to investigate discipline and reform. I want someone who will make bias so expensive and so risky that no employee will ever consider it. The financial consequences were already becoming clear. Apex Airways stock had dropped 3% in after-hours trading as investors worried about the cost of discrimination lawsuits, federal investigations, and reputation damage. The company's customer service lines were flooded with calls from passengers expressing both outrage and support. But Victoria Rodriguez had not built her company by worrying about short-term stock prices or temporary PR problems. She had built it by doing the right thing even when the right thing was expensive. I want every employee in the company to receive mandatory bias training within the next 60 days, Victoria announced to her team. I want new hiring practices that prioritize diversity and cultural competency. I want new promotion criteria that include demonstrated commitment to equality. And I want new consequences that make discrimination a firing offense. No exceptions. No second chances. Ma'am said the head of HR, that level of change is going to be expensive and time-consuming. It might be more efficient to focus on targeted improvements in problem areas. Targeted improvements are what got us into this situation, Victoria replied. We've been treating discrimination as a problem that affects some routes, some crews, some passengers. What happened to my son proves that bias is a company-wide issue that requires company-wide solutions. As the evening continued, more consequences unfolded. Captain Mitchell's pilot's license was being reviewed by federal aviation authorities who were questioning whether someone who had enabled discrimination should be trusted with the safety of passengers. Maria Gonzalez was facing not only unemployment, but potential criminal charges for the fraudulent meal charges. Brad Thompson had been escorted from O'Hare Airport by security and was reportedly meeting with lawyers about his termination. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the conversation that had started among Apex Airways employees themselves. Flight crews were discussing the incident, sharing their own experiences with bias, questioning their own assumptions about passengers. Gate agents were reviewing their training materials and wondering how many times they had made assumptions based on appearance. Corporate executives were examining policies that seemed neutral but might be applied differently depending on the passenger. The conversation wasn't limited to Apex Airways. Other airlines were reviewing their own discrimination complaint records, worried that they might have similar problems. Aviation industry groups were calling for new standards and training requirements. Federal authorities were discussing regulations that would make airlines more accountable for bias incidents. By midnight, Victoria and Jamal were finally alone in his hotel room near LAX, where he was supposed to be preparing for college orientation the next day. Instead, he was processing an experience that had changed not just his life, but potentially the entire aviation industry. "Are you going to be okay going to orientation tomorrow?" Victoria asked. "After everything that happened today, I think." "So," Jamal said. "Actually, I think what happened today taught me something important about what I want to study." "What's that?" "I was already planning to study civil rights law," Jamal said. "But now I understand why it matters in a way I didn't before. What happened to me today has happened to thousands of other people who don't have a mother who can fire the people discriminating against them." Victoria nodded. "That's the burden of privilege, baby. When you have power, you have a responsibility to use it for people who don't. Is that why you started the airline?" "Partly," Victoria said. "I started it because I was tired of being told I didn't belong. But I've kept building it because I want to create spaces where everyone belongs, where your background doesn't determine your treatment, where respect is the default, not the exception." "Did you know this would happen when you booked my ticket?" Jamal asked. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I hoped it wouldn't, but I suspected it might, and I needed to know the truth about what was happening on that route. So I was part of an investigation." "You were part of a test," Victoria said. "A test to see if the values I thought we had as a company were real or just words on a website. And we failed that test. But now we have a chance to do better." Jamal thought about this for a while. "Mom, what's going to happen to the people who lost their jobs? To Captain Mitchell and Maria and Brad? They're going to have to rebuild their lives," Victoria said. "Hopefully they'll learn from this experience and become better people. But their consequences are the result of their choices, not something that happened to them. And Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson is going to discover that his prejudices have a price," Victoria said. "He's banned from flying with us or our partner airlines. That's going to make his travel much more difficult and expensive. Maybe that will give him time to think about his assumptions." As they talked, both Victoria and Jamal were aware that their conversation was taking place against the backdrop of a much larger transformation. What had happened on Flight 847 wasn't just about one crew, one passenger, or one incident. It was about a pattern of bias that existed throughout the airline industry and throughout society. But it was also about the power of speaking up, the importance of accountability, and the possibility of change when people with privilege used their position to fight for justice instead of just protecting their own comfort. "I love you, Mom," Jamal said as Victoria prepared to leave for her hotel. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for protecting me. Thank you for showing me what justice looks like." "I love you too, baby," Victoria said. "And thank you for handling today with such grace. You made me proud, not just as your mother, but as someone who believes in doing the right thing even when it's difficult." As Victoria left the hotel that night, she was already planning the next phase of Apex Airways' transformation. But she was also thinking about something more personal, the young man her son was becoming and the role he would play in continuing the fight for equality that she had started. 6 months after Flight 847, the aviation industry looked different, not just because of new regulations or training requirements, but because a young black man's courage to call his mother had started a conversation that refused to end. Jamal Rodriguez was thriving at the University of Chicago, where his story had made him something of a campus celebrity. but more importantly, it had connected him with professors, researchers, and fellow students who were working on civil rights issues. He had started a student organization called Dignity in Transit that documented transportation discrimination and advocated for policy changes. His first-year law courses were taking on new meaning as he studied cases involving bias, federal jurisdiction, and corporate accountability. Professors used his experience as a case study in how individual incidents could spark widespread reform. Guest speakers from civil rights organizations regularly referenced Flight 847 as an example of how social media and family support could create justice, even in situations where traditional power structures had failed. Apex Airways had become a completely different company. Victoria Rodriguez had kept every promise she made during that phone call at 35,000 feet. Every employee had received comprehensive bias training. Hiring and promotion practices had been overhauled to prioritize diversity and cultural competency. The new Chief Equality Officer, Dr. Angela Thompson, had investigated and resolved over 200 discrimination complaints in her first 6 months. But perhaps most significantly, Apex Airways had become a model for the rest of the industry. Other airlines were copying their training programs, their complaint procedures, their accountability measures. Federal regulations had been updated to require annual bias reporting from all major carriers. The Department of Transportation had created new penalties for discrimination incidents. The 3 employees who had been fired from Flight 847 had taken very different paths in the aftermath of their termination. Captain Mitchell had lost his pilot's license and his pension, but he had also gained perspective. He now worked as a safety consultant traveling to airlines to speak about the importance of leadership and the cost of staying silent when witnessing injustice. His presentations always included the story of how his passivity had destroyed his career and hurt an innocent young man. Brad Thompson had filed multiple unsuccessful lawsuits against Apex Airways, claiming wrongful termination. When those failed, he had struggled to find work in the aviation industry. Eventually, he had taken a job with a small regional airline where he was required to complete bias training every 3 months. His supervisors monitored his interactions with passengers closely. Maria Gonzalez had faced criminal charges for defrauding Jamal with the fake meal charges. She had pled guilty to a misdemeanor and paid a fine, but had avoided jail time. After months of unemployment, she had found work as a training instructor for a company that taught customer service skills. Ironically, her job now involved teaching others about the importance of treating all customers with equal respect. William Henderson III had discovered that being banned from major airlines was more devastating than he had imagined. His business travel had become complicated and expensive. Clients had learned about the Flight 847 incident through news coverage and social media. Several had canceled contracts, citing concerns about his judgment and character. Henderson had eventually sold his investment firm and taken early retirement. But the most lasting changes weren't in individual careers or corporate policies. They were in the conversations that continued to happen every day across the aviation industry and beyond. Passengers were more likely to speak up when they witnessed discrimination. Flight crews were more careful about their assumptions and more thoughtful about their treatment of different passengers. Gate agents thought twice before making judgments based on appearance. Corporate executives understood that bias wasn't just morally wrong, it was financially catastrophic. The ripple effects extended beyond aviation. Discrimination incidents in hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and other industries were being examined through the lens of Flight 847. The question, what would happen if this went viral, had become a powerful deterrent to biased behavior. But perhaps most importantly, young people of color across the country had seen what was possible when they refused to accept discriminatory treatment. Jamal's story had become a template for standing up to bias with dignity, documenting incidents properly, and knowing when to ask for help. A year after Flight 847, Jamal was invited to speak at Apex Airways' annual company meeting. Standing before thousands of employees, including pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, and executives, he delivered a message that had been shaped by both his experience and his legal studies. What happened to me on Flight 847 wasn't unique, Jamal told the audience. Young black men and women face assumptions and accusations like this every day in airports, in stores, in schools, in workplaces. The only thing that was unique about my experience was that I had someone powerful enough to protect me. He paused, looking around the auditorium filled with people who had committed to doing better. My mother taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about prevention. It's about creating environments where discrimination becomes impossible instead of just punishable. That's what you've done here at Apex Airways. You've proven that a company can change, that people can learn, that bias can be eliminated through commitment and accountability. Jamal's speech was interrupted by standing ovations 3 times, but he wasn't finished. The test isn't whether you treat people like me with respect, he continued. The test is whether you treat everyone with respect, especially people who don't have powerful mothers, famous stories, or media attention. The test is whether dignity becomes so normal, so automatic, so much a part of who you are that discrimination becomes unthinkable. When Jamal finished his speech, Victoria Rodriguez joined him on stage. Mother and son stood together representing both the progress that had been made and the work that remained to be done. My son handled discrimination with more grace than most adults could manage, Victoria told the audience. But he shouldn't have had to. None of our passengers should have to. That's why the changes we've made aren't temporary responses to a crisis. They're permanent commitments to the values that define who we are. As they left the stage together, Jamal and Victoria Rodriguez carried with them the knowledge that Flight 847 had become more than an incident. It had become a catalyst for change that would continue long after both of them were gone. The story of a young black man who called his mother and changed an industry had become a legacy of dignity, accountability, and the radical power of refusing to accept injustice as normal. And in airports across the country, in first-class cabins and economy sections, at gate counters and security checkpoints, employees and passengers alike remembered the lesson of Flight 847: respect isn't a privilege to be earned. It's a right to be protected. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power we all have to stand up for what's right, then I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button to show support for dignity and justice. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters, that standing up for yourself isn't just allowed, it's necessary. Have you ever had to make that phone call? Have you ever stood up to discrimination or wished you had? Tell us your story in the comments below. Because every time we share these experiences, every time we refuse to stay silent, we make the world a little more just for everyone. Remember what Jamal's mother taught him. Respect isn't a luxury item. It's something every human being deserves, regardless of how they look, where they come from, or who they know. Until next time, keep standing up, keep speaking out, and never forget that sometimes one phone call can change everything.